Okay, good afternoon, folks. Home handyman. And so, what's the topic of coffee and questions today? No coffee, late in the afternoon. We'll skip it and go with water. And let's talk about how to make a drill press stand. Now, I had somebody send me an email, and I emailed him back, and I thought, I'd make a good content video to throw up because he was asking, I don't even know how to go about laying it out. How do I begin? And I'm not real sure about the materials. And he had lots and lots and lots of questions. So I answered most all of his questions, emailed him, we went back and forth. I'm waiting to see if he sends me a picture of his completed table. So far he hasn't, but I want to go ahead and I want to do a video on how to do this. Now, the first thing that you want to think about is what are the dimensions of the table. Now, I'm tall, I'm 6'5". So when I made my table, I made it up to the height that I wanted. I didn't go with a standard height. And just like in this picture here, I made one very similar to this, and I did it in 2 stages. I made the table first, just like in the picture, with the casters, and then I turned around later on and I came back and I added this extension piece, just like he did here in this photo. Mine is almost identical to this, and it is an incredibly handy thing to have. If you want to cut like a long piece of sheet or you need that additional support, the part here that I can pull out supports it, so that's a big benefit, but you don't need to do that right off. I wanted to go through step by step with you how I do this and how I lay it out when I build them, or when I built like the one that I have. So I'm going to change the picture here, and we will start by going step 1, step 2, and so forth, and I'll answer questions as we go. All right, here we go. One comment before I change the screen. Mine looks a lot like this, and I do have a vise mounted to it like he does, but all the way down on the other end I have a bench drill press that's mounted on there. And that's kind of what the question is how do I build, a bench for my drill press? If you don't have one already built out of wood against the wall and sheeted with plywood and blah, 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 this is what the video is about, is I'm going to show you step by step how you can build your own table. But I wanted to throw that in because in this picture it doesn't show a drill press, mounted on the table. Okay, here we go. Okay, well, your first decision is going to be what's the width, what's the length, and what's the height. Now, what I did with mine, and it depends on the room that you have in your garage or in your shop, is like I said, I'm 6'5", so I brought mine up to about waist level, thereabouts, used a measuring tape, and I figured, okay, that's a very comfortable height. And what would happen if I'm sitting on a stool? So I kind of put a stool there and put my hands out and played around and figured out what I thought would be the ideal height. Okay, now, the width of it, well, that is up to you, and so is the length. I mean, those are the dimensions that you're going to put it against a wall or put it somewhere in your garage where you've got to put it out of the way. Those dimensions are going to be whatever you want them to be. But the picture here is showing you the basic construction. Once I bought the tube steel, and it doesn't have to be thick gauged rectangular tube steel. You can use thin, okay, because it's steel. So the more that you add in this thickness, the heavier duty it's going to be, and it's going to be heavy. And if you make it big enough, you're going to need a hoist to bring this thing up and sit it upright. So those are things to keep into consideration. You really don't need or pay for the thick walled steel unless you really have a specific reason. So take a look at your steel supply place. They'll give you some recommendations and ideas, and they'll tell you what's on sale and so forth. But go ahead and get the steel, and this is the pattern. This is the same pattern that I used when I built the frame. Okay, now let's change the picture, move forward. Now you got your height, width, length, and you know the gauge steel or thereabouts that you're going to buy, and you know how you're going to construct it. Let me change the picture. Okay, now the next step is to get a way you can square this before you weld it. Now I have both, the magnet above, and I have a square like you see over here on the upper right. I would encourage you to get both. They're very cheap. You can get them both out at Harbor Freight, and they don't cost that much, and they come in exceptionally handy when you're trying to make things square and in perfect alignment. So make sure you got one or both of these, and let's go on to the next step. Okay, so what's the next step? Well, the next step is if you're going to use a square, like right here, you want a square in these corners all the way around all 4 sides and make sure it's square. Then take your square to the outside, like right here, and make sure it's square around on the outside. Now, if you got magnets, that's a help. You could put the magnets on the inside on all 4 corners, but then you're going to take this square and go all the way around it and make sure it's square. Now, if you want an additional way, to make sure that it is square, what you can do, what I was going to say is you could actually do it a third way and measure on the diagonal on both ends and see by measuring corner to corner on that diagonal, do you have the exact same measurement. But once you're satisfied and you've double checked or even triple checked, and I triple check them, then you go ahead and you can add the tack welds like you see. And you take a look here, you'll see where it's tack welded in each corner and in each end all the way around. Now that'll keep it square. So tack weld, don't go to town welding it, all right? So tack weld it first. Then we're going to check the squareness one more time. Okay, so taking a look at the picture on the upper left, you can see the tack welds where I zoomed in real close. And you can see it's been weld prep. You put a tack in each one of the corners and on each one of the ends, and the same thing on the bottom here if you take a real close look. Then what are you going to do? Well, after you have checked your square all the way around to make sure everything is still true, it's still square, whether you measure on the diagonal or however you do it with that framing square or whatever you have, then turn around and you do your welds like over here on the far right. And you can see where you just came along and you started doing your beads. Okay, so then what do you do after that? Okay, take a look over here on the right, then we come down the face of it. Now don't worry, these are not perfect welds, I understand, but you're going to go over this with your 4.5-inch angle grinder and a flat disc, whether it's 40 grit, 60 grit, 80, whatever you have, and you're going to clean everything up anyway. So you got this thing all welded now. This is your initial frame for the top. Okay, and at this point you're going to do the legs. You're going to do the part that comes all the way down. And when you do that, you're going to use a square or you're going to use a magnets to hold it in place so it stays in perfect alignment. Then you're going to go ahead and you're going to tack weld on all these corners. Okay, and then you're going to recheck it again to make sure it's nice and square and true. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to run your welds, just like it is in the picture above my head. You can use either or both, the magnet or the square like I show you in the picture here, and then that will keep things in true alignment. Okay, so that's your next step. Okay, now let's move on. All right, this is a picture showing you how I put the casters on. I use heavy-duty casters. You can get them at McMaster-Carr, Granger, you can get them almost anywhere. And I use thick plate steel, and I cut them square, and then I go ahead and I drill through so that I know that with bolts, these casters will mount correctly when I want them on, and I mark them so that I know what's right, what's left, which one's A, B, C, and D on the caster so everything will line up when I want it to. Then I take and I go ahead and I weld these on to the base of that table, just like you see here in the picture. This creates an incredibly strong, durable base. Now you can also use crisscross members like he did in this photo. That's not what I did, but I did use angle iron on the bottom, and then you can put boards down there and create yourself a shelf. But once the initial frame is done, then making this bottom frame is rather easy. You just measure, cut, weld in that angle iron, then go ahead and start on your on the plates for your casters, like here in the picture. Okay, now you got the frame done, top, bottom, you got your casters on and everything like that. Now, one thing to consider is whether or not you're going to mount a vise. If you are, take a close look in the picture, and I do the same thing. You weld in a couple more pieces of that rectangular steel so you have a big, broad base, so that when you set that vise on there and you mark, you drill holes through it, you know, you get vices on there, it's got something to really clamp down onto. If you forget to do this step and you put the top on, well, you're kind of screwed because you're going to have to take that top back off in order to put the plating or that rectangular steel in here like this. So if you're going to mount a vise, do this step next. Now, if you don't want to do it that way and you're unsure if it's going to be in your way on the tabletop, another way to do it is this. You can make a base and you can make a downward post and drop it in through the hole in your table, and that's another way because you can easily remove it, set it under the bench, put it back up on top whenever you want to. So the choice is yours if it comes to mounting the vise. Now you're going to do the drill press the same way at the other end by using those pieces of rectangular steel to create a nice wide base, because when you put that drill press on and you go through the tabletop into it, you're going to want to be able this thing to mount very, very sturdy. So both the vise and the drill press, you're going to need to put some thought before you put the tabletop on. Okay, let's go back for a second. Let's take a look at that rectangular base under that vise. You're going to do the same thing on both ends so that you have a good solid place to mount both the vise and the drill press too. So remember to do these first before you put the tabletop on. Now, the top, of course, is going to be up to you. You can use diamond plate, you can use real thick gauge sheet metal, you can use wood, you can use a variety of things. Okay, so when you're done, it's going to look very similar to this. It may not have all this crisscrossing metal that you see on the bottom, but you're going to have that angle iron going around it, or at least along the length on each side, so that you can drop wood into there, or a piece of plywood, or you can use 2x6s, 2x8s, whatever, and you can create that bottom shelf. So in this one, he's got both casters and he's got leveling like pads. Now that's another way you can do it. I've got another video. You can go back and look on putting leveling pads on the bottom of a table. This guy used both. So I mean, with a wrench, he can get under there and he can tighten these up. It'll be mobile, and then he can back them off, loosening them, and then he can make his tabletop like perfectly level if he wants to by doing it that way. You don't have to do that. I mean, if you've got a fairly level, garage floor, concrete floor or something. But it is an option here. Okay, now, so you can put wood on the bottom, like I said, to create that additional storage space. Take a look at another picture and see what you could do at the top. Okay, so he put on this one a very solid piece of wood on the top. You don't have to do that. Like I said, you can use diamond plate, you can use thick gauge sheet metal, you can use 2x8s, 2x12s, whatever you want, and create a tabletop. You can use 3/4 inch plywood, or you can double it up. You can do a whole host of things to create that tabletop. But then when the tabletop is on there, and you go around it with a measuring tape, and you got it nice and square, and just the way you want it, with a pencil on the underneath side, because you already have those holes drilled where your drill press and vise are going to go, you can reach up and mark the holes, okay, and then you label it, drill press this side or whatever, label it, flip this thing over, drill your holes. Then when you set this back down on there and you bolt it down, it'll go right through the wood, right through the metal, and you can bolt it down nice and secure. Now, if you want to, as you go around here, if you're going to use wood, you're going to have to drill down through the wood also in at least 6 or 8 areas, depending on the dimensions of your table, and drop bolts or something through there to secure the entire table. If you're going to use some kind of a metal top, that's different. You can use your MIG welder and zap it in. Okay, here's an exploded view of where I said to put those additional pieces of rectangular steel that you're going to mount the vise or the drill press to. You'll also see here just above my head to the left, these are tabs. The guy made tabs and he went around it because this is what he'll use to drop bolts through from the top down. And they'll come right into here. He can mark those holes on the underneath side. When he flips it over to drill the other holes, he can drill those too. And then he can bolt it down. Of course, if you're going to do that, countersink on the top, okay, so that the bolts so that the bolts sit down in there flush. So those are considerations that you can do, and yes, you can make tabs all the way around it. You don't have to drill through the rectangular steel, so you got more than one way you can secure the top. Okay, questions. Okay, first question, can you explain to us how you go about weld prepping? Yeah, I clean the steel with acetone real well, and that helps you prep it for painting. Anyway, let me change the picture and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, right here is the best example of what I can explain to you about weld prepping. The metal is incredibly clean. I've wiped it with acetone. I've also created this bevel pretty much all the way around it. Therefore, when you weld it, you'll be able to fill this gap in. You'll get great penetration all the way through, and it will be strong as hell when you're done. And don't forget, you're going to be able to go over this with the 4.5 inch angle grinder with a flap disc and clean it up. You can actually go like 60, 80 grit up to 120 or better and almost polish this thing if you wanted to. But you don't need to. Somewhere around 40, 60, 80 grit wheels. It works perfectly fine for me. It just depends on the thickness of the welds. But you'll be able to clean them up, and that creates this nice slick surface when you're done. Okay, so you've made the table and it looks pretty much like this or similar, whether you got the wood top on it or not. Take a look at the bottom. You can see around these pieces of metal, the guy here in the picture used expanded metal, and he went all the way along it. So that's easy for cleanup or something if you've got a lot of material that's got debris and stuff. On mine, I use solid wood. It looks cleaner. It's just the way that I like it. But you can make variations in this and tweak it to your own design. Now you'll notice right up here on the right, on the end, a round piece of piping that's welded in there. Now that's like a torch holder. If he's using this as a welding table, he can drop his torch into that. But if you take away that piece, like I said, this is almost very similar in design to what I made. And I've got holes on the top where I can, mount my drill press, my bench top, or a vise or whatever I want to do. Or even with the drill press on there, because I do a lot of metal fabricating stuff and welding, I leave the drill press on there, but I still got this huge amount of area that I can use to put steel on, I can line things up and play around. So I still got an enormous amount of room. All right, I didn't want to make this a long video, but I think that, I gave you enough to where you should be able easily to go out into your shop. As long as you got a chop saw or some way of cutting steel and you got a welder, this is not that difficult of a project. Just take your time, okay? And don't be in a rush. Make sure that you make it the height that you want. Make sure that you make everything square. So remember, you can use those framing squares or any kind of a small square, or you can use magnets, or you can measure on the diagonal. There are multiple ways to recheck your squareness before you start welding. Always tack weld. After tack welding, recheck all your squareness before you start running your welds. Okay, those are some quick tips. Remember to wipe it all down really well with acetone if you're going to paint it. Shoot primer on it or not, that's your choice. Make it any color you want. Have fun doing it. I'm the Home Handyman. I hope you click subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. Stay with me, and I'll keep throwing up things as you people ask questions. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.